legislation on best and brightest. This was the if a student or if a teacher scores in the upper 80th percentile of their SAT or ACT scores in high school, they're high performing, they're eligible for a $10,000 bonus, and that was the legislation that was in a proviso or appropriation bill for this current year. The House is moving that particular bill along. On the Senate side, it's Senate Bill 978. In the Senate right now, it's got a lot of mixed feeling, shall I say. It passed out barely on a 6-5 vote last week. The intent behind the bill, and this is really a House bill that Representative Eric Fresson, who is the Appropriations Chair for Education, pursued, is to try to do something that incentivizes students who score high in SAT and ACT to go into education, not go into engineering, science, other areas, but to be competitive and go into education. That's the intent behind that. There's really not any correlation between one score to the other, but it's mainly meant to be a recruitment incentive for them to go into education or to stay in education as it comes through. Again, on the Senate side, there's a lot of mixed feeling with that. I'm not sure if that bill will pass this year. Probably in the end, it may be continued for another year, but it is still out there as we deal with that. The testing issue, Senate Bill 1360 and Senate Bill 1078, and right now there is no House equivalent of that. But it's important in that for the first time in the 17 years now that we've had the A+ plan in effect, this is the first time that legislation has been proposed to say, let's use or give districts the option of using an alternative to the state assessment. The legislation by Senator Don Gates is, I'm going to say, needs a lot of refinement for various people or various reasons, but it puts forth the issue of using ACT, SAT in lieu of 10th grade FSA. Did everybody get all those little alphabet in? Anybody not know what I'm referring to? Okay. And also there's a exam level at with ACT called Aspire, and that would also be allowed for use at the elementary and middle school level. It's a parent's choice bill to a large extent. As it comes up, and it's coming up, by the way, on Wednesday in committee, one of the things that needs to be refined is that at the way it's currently written, it requires the school district to be able to administer all 3 exams. That is a logistical nightmare in a lot of small counties in particular. They don't have the staff to be able to do that, the proctors to be able to do that. Also, we don't quite have the correlation or the concordance to make sure that SAT and ACT fully measures Florida's standards. So it's kind of like a work in progress, but it is the first time this has been discussed. So in a way, that's at least good news of having something that can be an alternative that may result in reduced testing time, reduced testing of students, and where you've got something that is nationally recognized so that as people come in, and I don't know, I'm going to ask, and this is maybe a rhetorical question, of everybody that you know who has ever moved in from out of state now, has anyone ever asked you off the top of their bat? They may ask you, what's the school grade? But has anybody ever asked you directly, I want to know how your FCAT scores are. I want to know what your FSA scores are. I want to know what your SAT scores are. I want to know what your ACT scores are. How are your NAEP scores? So what we're dealing with is national comparisons. And that's one of the trends that I think may occur this year, not sure. As I said, the House does not have any legislation on that right up to this point. Those of you who are elementary parents and incoming elementary parents, major legislation coming out of the House K-12 committee, it's House Bill 7021. This is legislation for what they call struggling readers. It focuses on students who may have developing disabilities. Specifically, it was written to try to deal with dyslexia, but it incorporates strategies of what is called multi-tier support system, MTSS, which is an identification process more than anything else, and it provides a good degree of flexibility to districts and schools as to how they organize for the teaching of reading. But the idea is to make sure that you've got strategies in place for all students, regardless of their ability, regardless of any issues that they might have, any learning problems they might have. This bill is going to will pass the House. The Senate has a Senate version of it. Hasn't quite been heard yet, but I expect that this will be something that I think the House and the Senate are going to conference over. On the Senate side, we continue to have legislation by Senator Simmons to continue the low 300 schools across the state. This is perhaps a different approach toward that, and we'll see what happens. But I would encourage you to follow 7021 as we go along. Quickly, yeah. 7021 is a committee bill. Representative Atkins, Janet Atkins, chairs the K-12 Education Committee, and it's been really through her efforts and her meeting with parents around the state that this bill has come up. The coding bill, I was asked to talk about that a little bit. Senator Ring's Bill 468, which is now in appropriations. It's gone through 2 committee stops on the Senate side. There is a House version 887, which has not been heard yet. This allows essentially computer coding to count as a foreign language. It is geared especially for those students who may be going into STEM in particular, particularly the engineering piece or the computer technology part, to be able to get credit for that. And you may notice that around the country, for example, including the White House, there is a push to say that this is something that needs to be taught more. So this is an option. Your traditional foreign language teachers are not overly whelmed by this bill, but it is, again, it's an option that parents can use and students can use depending upon where they wish to go for further education. Guns on campus. The Senate bill was withdrawn. House bill by Representative Stubbe has not come up at this point. There's actually 2 or 3 different guns on campus bills, but the one I'm referring to is the one that would allow a school district to have a policy to allow a individual who is specially trained, who has a concealed weapons permit, to be on a school campus carrying a weapon in the event of any shooting action. At this stage, we're 2nd week into the session. Without a Senate bill, chances are this will not pass this year. The focus has been on the college level issues, resulting in part from an incident that occurred here at Florida State a couple of years ago. What I know is what I read in the paper, in that the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee is not real keen on taking that bill up. But I do expect to see the House companion move along. There's also a general open carry legislation that is in play. Don't know what's going to happen to it. This is one that if somebody has a concealed weapons permit, that they would be able to openly carry a weapon wherever they go, except on school grounds. That is still one thing that is blocked. So I'm not sure what will happen with that at this point. The initial momentum for that seems to have subsided a little bit. But again, we have 7 weeks to go in the session, so a lot can happen in regard to that. The recess bill, Representative Placencia, and especially as we deal with that, is coming up tomorrow morning in K-12 education. I don't know, it's a weird commentary that we're even having legislation to talk about should there or should there not be recess. You know, I look back, yes, I do have a grandson who's 9 years old, and his dad is a PTAer, by the way, in Polk County. Anybody from Polk County? But it strikes me as really strange. At any rate, because of the focus that's been given on testing, because of the push to learn standards, the recess in many places has become a casualty. This effort to bring it back is probably common sense. It really shouldn't have to be, but it is here. I think it's going to get some very widespread support as it moves on, as well as redefining the issue on PE, where it does not take into, that is not meant to compete with physical education. Part of that bill, by the way, does also specify that the 150 minutes of physical education per week, which is currently in law, must be 30 minutes a day. So that is in play. Much of that's because we are concerned with having an obese population. I would just say, as PTAers, please, 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 don't let this be the only exercise kids get during the week. Because that is, schools can't solve obesity by ourselves. We can have great nutrition programs, we can have great exercise programs, we certainly can have recess, which helps provide some mental relief as well as some physical exercise. It's also after school and what happens in the other 6,000 hours a year that the student is not in school. So please help promote exercise as we deal with that outside the school year as well. Representative Placencia is certainly going to have some additional comments on that, but I know PTA is very grateful for this legislation coming up. And let me just see if I've missed anything on a scatterbrain here. The one thing I do want to talk about, those are the highlights. The one thing I do want to talk about a little bit, and I think this came up last night, is federal legislation. I get involved in that a lot with Every Child Student, or Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. It's a work in progress, but let me just make a couple of points that might be of interest to you. Number one, the legislation takes effect technically now, technically beginning with the 16-17 school year. There was a rider, however, in the budget that was passed that essentially says whatever you're doing now, this year, you will also do next year, because they will not have all the rules, regulations in place, and the states also have to go, do their bit in terms of State Board of Education rules, and perhaps even in 2017 any legislative changes before it takes effect come August of 2017. So for the most part, what we're looking at is what is in existing law now, and the so-called Florida waiver, which technically expires August 1, but language in the Appropriations Act will really continue that for another year. So come this August, don't look for any massive change. That's the bottom line of what I'm saying. Logistically, it will take the U.S. Department of Education at least 6 to 9 months to go through all the rulemaking procedures that they have. The State Department of Education, the Florida Board of Education, probably this summer will start getting into some of that. From what I've seen and heard, quite frankly, no matter how you feel, there probably will not have to be much of any change that Florida makes to what this legislation provides for. But nonetheless, the state may wish to make some changes on its own. It will be still subject to the 2017 Florida legislature. More importantly, this is going to cover 2 federal administrations. So you've got the remaining current sitting administration with an acting secretary, John King, between now and next January 3. And whatever president is elected or administration comes into play on January 20th of next year can make changes still. So it's largely going to wind up being a moving target. They can't change the law, but they can change how it is implemented. So that's one reason why, at least for our school year 16-17, we're probably best off to say, let's just leave things as they are, except as we go through the process, like on the testing stuff, but not to make any wholesale changes. The federal legislation clearly says states will have a standardized testing program administration grades 3 through 8 in high school. That did not go away. The federal law backs out of any reference on teacher certification, teacher requirements, teacher evaluation. That is left up to the states at this point. It is also still where the states and the districts still must have a maintenance of effort, dollar effort with that. It, I think, will help the issue of students who have a language deficiency with your ELL program, where it says the states will have an exam for measuring English. It also requires that there be assessment on progress of how much better that student does from year to year, as correlated to how students perform on whatever the state academic exam is, in our case FSA, on how that goes. That may be of some help in terms of having students come in learning English, who don't know English, to learn it quicker. And as you know, at least I know in our part of the world, we have students who come in from Guatemala, Nicaragua, other locations. They have no written language at all. So as a result, you can't expect a student in 1 year to become proficient taking an FSA exam. So that hopefully will be of some help in bringing people up.